fascinating new study out of Jacobin about what sort of messaging and priorities actually moves working class voters. We have a lot of debates about this, of course, online and elsewhere. So they've got some actual data to back it up that is truly fascinating. Joining us to talk about that is one of the co-authors of that study, Dustin Guastella. He is not only co-author of the study, but also director of operations for Teamsters Local 623 in Philadelphia. Great to see you, friend.
Hey, good to see you, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Just give us the basics of how this study, because it's pretty unique, was constructed and what you hope to learn from it, and then we can get into the results.
Right. So, we were thinking a lot about this major question. I think it's a huge question in progressive politics, Democratic Party politics, about why it is that Democrats are losing so many working class voters, even though many of the policies that Democrats put forward are actually quite popular with working class voters. So we wanted to figure out what was going on here. And we figured that many of the polling firms that are currently trying to answer this question go about it in a kind of half-hearted way. They present voters with a policy and they tell them, do you like this policy, yes or no? Or they present voters with a soundbite and they say, do you like this soundbite, yes or no? So you get all these mix of political messages, and it's really hard to make sense of. Why is Medicare for All so popular, but Medicare for All candidates can't win in swing states? Why is it that progressive policies are popular across the country, but only progressives can get elected in deep blue areas? So we decided to try to create full candidate profiles to actually test what swing state working class voters like, what kind of candidates they gravitate toward, what kind of messaging they like, and what kind of platforms they like. And that's what we did. We tested about 2,000 swing state voters without college degrees to see what kind of candidates. We put them up against thousands of head-to-head candidates to see what kind of candidates they most preferred.
Right, and Dustin, what really caught my eye when I was reading through the takeaways here is that working class voters prefer progressive candidates who focus primarily on bread and butter economic issues, who frame those issues in universal terms. This is especially true outside deep blue parts of the country. What did you guys mean by that? I think it's a profound takeaway.
So this shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, I think it's something that people have known for quite some time, that economic working class issues appeal to working class voters. What I think is novel here is that we're saying, taking things back to the language of the civil rights movement, the language of the New Deal, framing things in universal terms. That is, these programs are going to help all of us. These programs are going to help the entire working class, and not this or that group of the working class, and not this or that section of the working class, but it's going to lift up everybody, and we're all in this together. That kind of universal messaging polls really well among this group. It polls very strongly among swing state working class voters.
I think it's also really important to point out that what you say here is that doesn't mean you have to abandon social justice. Doesn't mean that you don't talk about civil rights or race at all, but it's important not only how you talk about it, but also which issues you put as the focus and the centerpiece of your campaign. Just talk to us about what you found there.
Yeah, this is something that I think is really an important part of the study and an important part of our findings. A lot of what you'll hear, especially around the Clintonian Democrat world back, 10 years ago, it's different today, is that you can't talk about race or racism, you can't talk about civil rights, you can't talk about sexism, because these things are things that piss off working class white voters, right? We didn't find that to be true. What we found is that if you make that your campaign, if that is the thing that overshadows what you're actually trying to do from a policy perspective and for them and their pocketbooks and their wallets, then you're going to lose. So you need to be able to frame these things as a way of part of your campaign, part of what you're doing, to offer a holistic program of working class strength rather than make this the entirety of your campaign. And I think that's significant, because I think what it says is that the civil rights victories of the mid-century have been won. We have now moved into an era where we have an electorate that is broadly liberal on these questions, that broadly accepts the want and desire for social justice across a lot of different areas of our lives. But they also recognize the material frustrations of being somebody who doesn't have enough money to pay the mortgage, or is struggling with bills, or is struggling with with rent or these other things. And so you need to be able to center those economic issues if you want to win these voters.
Right. And, one line that really stuck out to me was this: blue-collar workers are especially sensitive to candidate messaging and respond even more acutely to the differences between populist and woke language. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so if you look at some of our talking points, we took these talking points, these sound bites, from a variety of candidates that we've seen: Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and we compared them to talking points from what we would consider mainstream or populist Democrats like Biden or Bernie. And when you look at and compare these things, the sort of woke Democrat on the moderate or progressive side are people who are framing things in a way to talk to very particular groups, particular issues, either racial minorities or sexual minorities, or, even folks with disabilities, these sorts of things. But they're framing things in a way that says these are the groups that are the center of politics, right? And then they're using a language on top of that that is basically stuck in the universities. It's very heavy to understand. It's very activist jargony. And it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're not somebody who went to college. So if you compare that with the kind of talking points that you see Bernie and Biden using, those talking points are much more favorable. And then the difference between the Bernie and Biden talking points, or the populist progressive talking point and the moderate mainstream talking point, are that the populist actually names an enemy. Right? The populist says the elites are the problem. We need working people to stand up against them. We believe that there's a real problem in this country between these two groups, and we need to fight together against them. That actually polled better than the moderate message, which was about unity and coming together across the aisle and all that sort of stuff. And among blue-collar manual workers, that was the biggest gap that we saw between the sort of woke candidates and the populist or mainstream kids.
But I do think it's important to say, based on these results, the more woke AOC type language, it does work pretty effectively if you're talking about urban or suburban areas, and especially if you have a majority minority district. So AOC's district, I believe, is majority minority. It's also urban. So it actually makes sense, based on your results, that she would do well there, even if that language, that sort of jargony language, has limited appeal on a national basis, the way that, Bernie Sanders, obviously, especially in 2016, had more appeal to white working class voters in the industrial Midwest.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that, our study didn't really go into depth on college-educated urban voters, right? So we can't say much about those voters. And those are a huge part of the Democratic coalition. And they shouldn't be considered, all elites, right? Many of those people work for a living. Many of those people are working class. Our study was really focusing on that group that Democrats continue to lose, right? Non-college educated folks, and the one that can tip the balance of power, those in swing states. So this was really a study to try to figure out what it is that is most effective among that group. And this is what we found. And I think, though this is a hunch and it goes outside the scope of the study, I think that if we actually were to study many of the college-educated and urban voters, we would find that a similar messaging convergence happens. I think they would probably prefer some more of the woke messaging, but my hunch is that the woke messaging and a lot of the, what we call woke today is a media phenomenon more than it is a voter phenomenon, more than it is a constituency phenomenon. So we'll see in the future. Hopefully we'll do some studies on that, but that's just a hunch of mine.
The other piece, final question is the reason you studied, there's a very specific reason why you studied working class voters who could be persuadable to these messages, because that's always so an important note. You sort of left out the hard conservatives who are never going to come over. You didn't focus on them. You focused on independents and Democratic leaning working class voters who were gettable. What's the reason to care about whether that coalition is part of a progressive coalition or not? Because that's another debate that happens. It's there are a lot of people who just want to lean into the college-educated vote and forget about those white working class voters altogether. Why is it important to care about what these people think?
Yeah, two simple reasons. One, over 60% of the electorate is this group. And two, over 60% of congressional seats are this group. So we need to, if progressives have any hope and prayer of being a majoritarian coalition, this is the bread and butter of that coalition. It needs to be at the center of the coalition. You cannot win a majority, even if you get all of the college-educated voters, which is impossible. But even if you got 100% of them, you would not be able to win a majority. Even if you got all of the cities, you would never be able to get a Senate majority. So if you're interested in swaying the balance of power in this country, which we'll admit is a totally screwed up federal system, but it's the system we have. If you're trying to sway the balance of power in that system, you need to win these voters. You need to be able to win a majority of them if you want to govern.
I would also submit if you had a coalition of just college-educated voters, you'd get some really shitty politics out of that.
It would also be cringe, which is probably the most important.
It would also be cringe. Dustin, thank you so much for breaking down these results. It's really fascinating. Everybody should go check out the longer read because there was a lot that I got out of this. Really appreciate your time.
I'm going to have a link in the description. Appreciate it, Dustin. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Our
Absolutely.
pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. We've got awesome upgrades here. You guys all loved the new color and the new production results. We had a little bit of a hiccups and all that, but bear with us. It's all made possible because of your support, and we really appreciate it. We've got big things in the works, so if you can become a premium subscriber today, we would deeply appreciate it. Link is there in the description.
Absolutely. Remember tomorrow to check out our partner segment with the Daily Poster. They're always doing phenomenal work following the money, which, as we all know, is the real story of what is actually happening in Washington, D.C. They've always got their eye on the ball there. No pun intended.
I forgot to say Happy Veterans Day to all of those who served, and we specifically shouted out to the U.S. Marines who watch the show. Happy Marine Corps birthday. To those who celebrate. So
That's right. Absolutely, guys. Enjoy the weekend. We got lots of great content for you posting this weekend, and we will see you back here with a full show on Monday.
See you Monday.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.